Hello, guys. This is CJ Lowry, one of the co-owners of Eukolos. I just wanted to do a video, and you can kind of scroll through and see what you need. Obviously, we are a data disaggregation company, so we are not um, taking your data in for you from different tests. We are taking your data after you've plugged it in, and then we're disaggregating it for you, trying to save time on that end, helping build better RTI 1 and 2 systems, which we will identify for you. There's my Twitter. Um, as well as our company Twitter. If you have questions, feel free to tweet at us. We also love to see pictures of people using our data if you are doing that. So please pass that out to teachers. So just data-driven decisions. Where did it come from? My co-founder with me, Alan Lohman, the long-haired, nerdy guy right there, he had gotten this data here, and as you could see, within our district that he was in, it was projected that he was told that, hey, you're not doing a good job. And, they said, oh, what everyone says, are you really, when we're doing apples to apples, your ESL kids and your GT kids, they pulled those out when really, we know that there's a lot of different apples per se within GT and a lot of different types of apples per se within ESL. And so what we wanted to do is we wanted to not just say, hey, I need drastic change, but he was an 11-year vet that said, hey, I think we need to look at this a little more clearly and really pull apples to apples. So what we did is he took, one Granny Smith apple, and he said, okay, well, let's find all the other Granny Smith apples within the district and see, what are they historically doing that are similar. So all of them that were similar, what did they do on this test? So this was the scores on that test, and so the district average was a 45, and he had a +5. So he said, okay, well, let me take one of my higher performing ESL, because we know we have different levels, and see if we can find lots of students that historically performed like this one, and see how they did on this test. And the average was 78, and so he was a +6. And then when we did that for all the kids, what we did was, using regression lines, you can find what the average is for all your kids, and he was actually a +6 with his ESL kids, meaning on average they were getting 6 points higher on the test than kids like them, not just ESL kids like them, but all types of kids like them. So instead of saying, hey, I need big change, he really did this for ESL and GT, and now we truly compared the different types of apples, Granny Smith to Granny Smith, or Red Delicious to Red Delicious, etc. And then when we got the data, you can see that he was number one in the district in growing the kids that he had in his class. And in GT, he was number two behind another school in the district, of which he wanted to, get them the next year. So his students really were having success. You just had to dig a little deeper on the data. And we think that in education, a lot of times we're spinning our wheels and doing a lot of work, but maybe we're not using the best data to do that work. So we're kind of working in the wrong direction. So this was an example of some of our students. All the data I'm going to use is real data. It's just, names have changed and such. But this was a reading team. And as you could see, historically, everyone's going to say, oh, Miss Knott, she's our best teacher, the highest achieving, she should lead the PLC, and maybe these other two down here, get put on growth plans. But I want to point out Miss Driver, Miss Knott, Miss Salas, and Miss Hartz. And when we put them into our system and we compared the level of kid that they had in that class to similar kids throughout that district and how they performed, Miss Driver was actually number one in the district. And I'll go back in just a second, but notice where Miss Hartz and Miss Stover were, who looked like they had performed higher, but really what was happening is we sat down with that principal and said, hey, what did you do? And it turns out that they had taken kids from Hart's and Stover's class that they couldn't handle and put them in Miss Driver's. So the level of kid that was in Miss Driver's was actually quite lower, because we know behavior kids, often it's due to the inability to read or stuff like that. But Miss Driver was taking those kids and getting a lot more growth out of them than maybe some of these other teachers. I always do like to point out that this Miss Knott teacher, even though she had some really high kids here that you can see, she still grew them. And here at Eukolos, we always argue that sometimes growing high kids is equally as tough as growing low kids, and sometimes tougher. But how do we do that? We use a regression line similar to the new A through F rating. We know that there's the y-axis with the score, and then the x-axis is what we consider the level of kid. That's our top secret formula, kind of like the cane sauce at Raising Cane's or something of that nature. But that's where we take into account the historical testing information, their demographic information, their reading level, and we take that into account and we build our regression line similar to what the state of Texas does, but theirs is based purely on your socioeconomic status. Socioeconomic status is a piece of ours, but not the entire piece. So what we do with that is we build that regression line, put those dots, but no longer is it important to just see how high you got on the y-axis. It's how high above the line you got, as according to the regression line. So you can see here, Miss Driver, where she should have been was somewhere right here, but she outperformed the level of kid that was in there, which means she was growing them more than any other teacher could have. So down here, you can see she was a +4 versus Miss Hartz and Miss Stover, who actually had an overall score higher than Miss Driver, were underperforming by a little bit, a -2 and a -1. And again, we give you this information, maybe Miss Stover missed some time. On maternity leave or something of that nature. You know what happened to Miss Stover, so you know whether or not you need to step in there and give more support, or if it's just a different year. But then you can see Miss Knott, who was the highest performing, outperformed where she should have been. And everyone wants to know, how do you know if this data is accurate? Well, we have an R-squared value, which shows the level of accuracy of our data, and ours is about a 0.93. So we provide you about 93% accuracy on our data. No data piece is accurate 100% very often, but social sciences is what this is. Looks for at least a 0.55 to be considered accurate. We're getting anywhere from about a 0.75 to a 0.95 on all of our data, and if we get lower than a 0.75, we tell you before we give it to you, so that hey, maybe there's a little more discrepancy as you look through the data. Maybe there are some things that you question a little bit more, but we'll never give you poor data without you asking those questions. So this is one of the things that we go through. You only have so much time and so many resources to do your data or your RTI2. So what we do is we say, okay, well, these guys circled, we traditionally say those are bubble kids, but we know now when we put the masters, meets, and grade levels, we really want to get to masters. Well, if you can only get after two of these groups, we want to add that regression line, and you can see Cup and AXUP are really outperforming versus Kate and Michael here, have the potential to get to that master's grade level. So we would say to work on them. But then what we identify even more is Marco and Jennifer here, who actually only passed the test. You want them to get to that level 1 or that level 2 with Kate or Michael, and all 4 of them should be able to get to that level. So you want them to get to that master's grade level. So we just wanted to show the second part of the video to show you what a sample spreadsheet would look like now that you kind of know how to use it. There will be a thing that maybe and again, it's all editable on who gets to see what: teachers, specialists, superintendent, assistant soups, principals, etc. But here what we would see is that here, this would be all the 3 different schools within a district. And this is all how they did in math, 5th grade from STAR from 2018. So very quickly, you can see the school that grew their kids the most is higher. Armstrong got what they should. A 0 is good. And Bradfield was a -1. So what we wanted to do there is, number one, we want to say, okay, well, what's a district PLC look like when we have these teams all come together? So here you have the frequency, the TEAC, the item number. That way, if you have the test out in front of you, their school, so their overall scores at the top, and then based on TEAC, how they did. So right here on the most highly tested TEACs here, you would want the Armstrong team coming in, explaining what they did here so that the other 2 schools could grow. And then you would want higher to come in and teach these, and you can scroll down and see what they want to work on. If you just wanted Bradfield to say, hey, here's the ones that you did the worst on, higher, that's where we want you to coach you. But if we come back to this screen, again, I just clicked the little back button. Bradfield, let's dive into them, because if you're a math curriculum specialist, this is where you'd probably want to spend some time and see where it's going. You'll notice same columns, but the teacher, Miss Ellis, is above her, Miss Rogers is above her, so Miss Ellis is overall a -5. So it wasn't the whole team, is really kind of Miss Rogers that's bringing this team down. And as you can see, there's probably not great PLC going on here. So again, let's take the frequency and go largest to smallest, largest to smallest. And so you can see here that these TEACs here, Miss Ellis really needs to work on, and she doesn't need to go to a conference or anything. She really just needs to go next door, because Miss Rogers seems to be doing well at those. But again, we don't want to just beat down Miss Ellis. She's really got some strengths for the PLC that we need Miss Rogers to learn from her. So again, it's not just about one person leading the PLC. It's now about two people having their strengths and knowing, hey, this is where I did well, this is where I didn't. I tried something new, it didn't work, or I did try something new and it did work. And now we need to both probably do that. And again, this takes out the excuse of, oh, she has the high kids, she has the low kids, because this is based on where the kid was when they walked in your room and where they walked out after this test, whether it's a STAR test, a benchmark, etc. So the next piece, so now you've done your RTI level 1. The next piece is probably my favorite, and how you can build an RTI level 2 very, very quickly. Again, student name, their ID, what teacher they have, so you can sort it here A to Z based on just the teacher. I'm going to control Z that just so that it goes back to how it was. This level here is just the actual score that the student got on the exam. The like student is what similar students to them based on that regression line that I'd shown you in the other video got. And then here, what their Eukolos number is. So number one, if you want to find all the kids that got mastery, all these kids got mastery and similar kids to them, they were not expected to get that. If we want to just go Eukolos, largest to smallest, these are all huge celebrations. One of the things, a -1 and a 2, that's kind of, remember, there's not all data is perfect. A -4, that may be a kid that we don't have much data on. But if you look at this, maybe an Adrian Castillo here, that historically kids like him are getting a 37. He got a 72. That could be a kid that maybe was in ELL, maybe he's getting into that year 2, year 3, but it's a lot of growth. So how do you really celebrate a 72? Well, now that's a plus 36, Rita Pearson style. Another kid here that showed a lot of growth. So you're really getting a lot of kids that are showing a lot of growth there. Some of my most favorite things to celebrate, how do you celebrate a 64? Or when similar kids got a 57, they were a +7. So maybe now this is also how you can reevaluate some of your grading practices. Maybe you tell a kid, hey, if you continue to grow, I'll add your Eukolos score to your actual score. And that 64 would then become a 73, however you want to do that. But then what you want to do is you want to sort the Eukolos numbers, smallest to largest. Number one, you want to identify, what really happened here. If they were projected at a 71, you've got such a large gap here. Are those kids that maybe you want to turn into the counselor, start getting them some social emotional help? Maybe it's not an academic issue, but this just allows you to identify those kids and start asking the questions. But my next really good thing that I like here is, how do you build this RTI2 system? Well, notice all of these kids all missed 5.3. So if all those kids miss 5.3, what we do here is you just go back. Which teacher taught 5.3 the best? Well, that was, sorry, click student. It was 5.3L. So then you go back. The teacher that taught 5.3L the best was right there. So Miss Rogers was a +14. Her teaching partner was a -17. So when you're building that RTI system, now I've identified the kids and what teacher and what teak in 2 minutes, and now you have an RTI2 system ready to go, versus it taking nights and nights and nights of staying out till midnight. So that's one of my favorite things, is going to the students and really getting to dive in and build those RTI2, maybe the RTI3 systems as well. Again, click into the school, Ms. Hire. This school actually only had one teacher there. So, obviously for her, the district PLC will be very important, because even though it represents higher here, that actually just represents that one teacher. So if she wants to grow, she's really going to have to PLC with these other schools, which is the power of this program. So that is how you're going to build your RTI1 and RTI2, and this is the system that you would get. Obviously, it would show you math and reading for each grade, science and social studies for the SSI grades, and then US history and biology in high school as well, and then you would click into the school, same idea. So this last piece, we just wanted to talk a little about, number one, how Rockwall is using it. A lot of times, Dr. Amy Ellis, also Amy Shields from South San also has presented with us. But Dr. Amy Ellis put this piece together for this. You can contact her here if you need to. How's Rockwall using the data? Obviously they're using it to guide conversations with principals and instructional coaches. Who's being the most effective? Where do we need to spend our time? Who is growing kids? Where would we not? So basically, when you only have a couple of instructional coaches, maybe only one for a district, where can they spend their most time to get your bang for your buck? And And then every summer, as you redesign your curriculum, what worked, what didn't, now you can really identify those teachers, not just that who had the high kids and scored high, but who grew their kids the most utilizing their curriculum. Ask them, hey, did you use the district provided curriculum, or did you kind of throw some things in there? And what were those things that you threw in there? And does the data show that they worked? So really reevaluating your curriculum design teams using Eukolos is great. So you want to make sure also, is your curriculum you're using, are those products that you purchased, um, are they being used with fidelity? And are the people that are using them getting good scores, and the people that not, maybe not? Or is somebody who isn't using the curriculum doing a really good job? And so maybe you need to reevaluate your curriculum so it can actually support the use of your district curriculum, or let you know that, hey, the district needs to reevaluate their curriculum, and maybe it's pieces of the curriculum. For pre-AP and on-level data, here you can utilize this idea of, did they really grow? Like we talked about earlier, sometimes it's tough to take high kids higher. Also, you can utilize this data to ensure that, which teacher's teaching pre-AP, because if you have a teacher that's doing really good at pre-AP and growing those kids, you want to make sure on master schedule as wise, you have those teachers working with them. And then is the differentiation working across the board? So obviously, you can looking at it by TEAC, how are the students and teachers performing, how are they teaching each component. So as you can see, there is a group of teachers working through their data, knowing who did the best at each one. Again, is the curriculum aligned? Who should work on curriculum? And are the supports we have in place, are they working, or do we need to look at providing more support? Principals use the data, obviously, to then plan their professional learning days. Maybe then now you've identified teachers that can teach that professional learning day coming up, and obviously at different times of the year, whether it's the beginning of the year, middle of the year, end of the year. And then it just changes the conversations that they can have on a more equitable way with their teams and individual teachers. So how are they going to use it moving forward? Obviously, they used it in 18-19, but now they're going to be using it for 19-20 as well. Primary data source, so they're no longer just using their straight raw data. They're only using the disaggregated data. Again, identifying those most effective teachers, and then they're not only doing that, but helping them lead curriculum, but then recording some of those effective teachers for the rest of their teams to watch. So obviously being able to provide early interventions. So if you have your STAR data disaggregated, teachers can start day one with good RTI-1 systems, as well as starting to put kids in RTI-2 systems before waiting on your first benchmark for that year. Another piece that we want to show here is just how sometimes our regular data misdiagnoses, because if all you do is you look at the raw score here of 3.7B, we scored an 88%, 3.5E, 82%, and etc. Sometimes the difficulty of the test goes up or down. You have a strong group. Just comparing it to the state isn't always fair, because we know different schools across the state don't always have the same kid. But when you look at it with the Eukolos, you want to look at the level of kid and how they did based on other level of kids. So if you had a TEAC 3.7B, your average performance was up here, and you actually scored here, that 88 would actually be a -5, and that's a growth area. Same thing here. If the average performance is high and you only got an 82, that's another growth area, because those should be able to grow. And I would argue that the -12 is a higher area of growth because you missed it by more when similar kids are doing that. Same thing, the 69. What if the actual performance was about a 61? You got a 69. That's not really an area of growth. That would be considered more of a strength, even though maybe traditional data doesn't tell you that. And you could continue to go on. Which TEAC, again, would be the most easy to improve? We would argue that 3.5E would be the most the test that would be the TEAC that would be the most easiest to improve, because it's the furthest away from zero, meaning other teachers on average were having success way more than you, versus the -2, maybe not as easy to improve. But imagine if every teacher had this information. Again, if every teacher had it, and every teacher could grow just by the TEAC that they were weak in and move up just that little bit. Now your masters is higher, your meets is higher, and your approach is higher. So that's really how we show the growth for every teacher, if they can each do that. And then that's how you're going to get better in the A through F rating. But at the end of the day, it's about the kids and being better for them. So again, here, another quick slide that shows maybe how this would happen. Looking at those three domains that we're judged by, we were going to want to look at the relative performance and how we're evaluated there. Again, it's the same Y and X axis that we talked about earlier. But what we want to do is we want to look at your school, and then within your school, if you're performing, within the yellow, and these are, all your regression lines for each. Then we break down your teachers, and then we dive into a single teacher, and then we dive all the way into that single teacher on each teak, and we can get each of their low performing teaks up. That teacher comes up a little bit, and if we can do that for so then your whole school comes in. But what if we could do that for every teacher, and they each come up a little bit? Now you have a tremendous growth, because now you're exponentializing that growth just by diving into Miss Smith right here, growing her again. So she comes up, the school goes up a little bit. But again, if you can do that for every teacher and they all go up a little bit, this is how you get to that A. So that's where we're at. It changes your coaching conversations. It changes your HR decisions, because you don't want to get rid of people that are growing kids, even though their raw score may not be as high. You look at your master schedule, and then eventually you should really be able to look at your principal evaluations and how well, one school is doing compared to the other, because now that's we're taking out of the context of, oh, we just have the low kids or they have the high kids, etc. So if you have that coaching conversation, given my students, I'm doing the best I can. Well, you're at a negative 12. I need to do better. But what if that was at a net positive 8? Then maybe we would celebrate that 61 differently. Here, your master schedule, we say, oh, well, look at the raw scores. Well, once we give you some perspective, if we could replace Jones with just an average teacher, look what happens to our school when we just hire someone new. So it's not about just keeping somebody. If they're not going to continue to grow, then your school goes up just because you got rid of one person that was bringing it down. Again, same thing here. As you can see, who's being the most effective at pre-AP, who's being the most effective with on-level and ESL. Well, what if you could just swap these and you had more students getting the best teachers? Now your teachers have higher Eukolos numbers and your district gets better. Here, what if you only had 53% of kids pass at AJH? What's your perspective of that? Well, usually it's bad. But what if that was really a positive too, just with a school with some tough kids? So, we really want to reevaluate some different ideas here on how we are doing our data and making better data-driven decisions.